Welcome, everybody, to our Monday, February 3rd edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I'm Tim Priest with Tim O'Malley. We're from Irish Illustrated. John Bright from the Football Scoop is with us, as is Pete Sampson of The Athletic. It is official. Chris Ash, as we've been saying for a while now, that is the new defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, replacing Al Golden. James Blanchard, Notre Dame looking for a general manager. We'll talk about his appearance around Notre Dame this weekend. Tyler Merrill, an offensive guard, verbal commitment in class of 2026. And the Notre Dame football schedule is officially official, set for the 2025 season. We'll get into that, but I'm not sure what else there is to talk about Chris Ash. I did a Irish Illustrated ISO the other day and went a little bit deeper into him and everything surrounding him. But Chris Ash is in place, and Notre Dame got themselves a pretty good defensive coordinator without a ton of play calling experience, but a guy that has had success on both levels of football.
That would be the biggest surprise for me. When this started, if you said Mike Mickens would be a co-coordinator, I would have thought play calling experience would have been the reason he wasn't the only coordinator. So I think that's the surprise. Obviously, we knew once Ash's name came out that was going to be the case. But I like the defense. I watched his videos. And then I watched some, I didn't watch any Rutgers film, but I watched some Ohio State film from back in the day. So I'm not poisoned by the events of the Rutgers situation. But I would have thought if you were going like Al Golden was, I think Pete and I were talking about this. Al Golden was perfect at the time because he had head coaching experience and play calling experience. For Marcus Freeman, this just seems like play calling experience would have been great here, like the cherry on top, probably.
Yeah, and I think that head coaching experience matters less now than it
Oh,
did
yeah.
with Al Golden too. I mean, I think that's significant too. So I guess if you're getting hung up on Rutgers being terrible, which is fine and accurate, I don't.
No, I just meant for Golden at the time, head coach was crucial. Now that doesn't
Oh
matter at all.
yes,
That doesn't matter at all
yeah,
now.
yeah. I don't, and it'll be interesting when Ash gets in there. We spend some time with him, like how. I'm curious, like what the Rutgers experience maybe helped him in hindsight in terms of being developing as a coach. Then also what he got out of the NFL experience. So I think that Al Golden probably got more like applicable stuff that worked at Notre Dame from his time with the Lions and the Bengals than maybe the Miami Temple experiences. So I'm interested about that too. But it's Marcus Freeman's program. Tim, I know that you've talked about the kind of the cultural fit and whatnot. Like I think it comes down to like if Urban Meyer's your boss, you're going to follow Urban Meyer's lead. If Marcus Freeman is your boss, you're going to follow Marcus Freeman's lead, and those are two different leads.
And I think that the culture is such a fabric of Marcus Freeman's program, and it's more entrenched than ever before. And so that's why I don't necessarily worry about whether or not Ash can be a fit in this culture, because I think that the players have so embraced Marcus's culture that the culture sort of manifests itself at this point. Ash has not had an extensive history of calling plays. And when he did his best work at Ohio State, his co-defensive coordinator was none other than Luke Fickell. So he's had some great people around him. There's still some really good coaches on the Notre Dame staff. I had somebody tell me just within the last week that they believe either side of the ball, all things considered, Max Bullum might be the very best coach on Notre Dame staff. The way that he saw things, the way that he even presented when it was his turn for the Coach of the Week program that I spotlighted and wrote about last month on Football Scoop. So there's still a very strong staff in place at Notre Dame. Ash is going to be the guy spearheading the defense. It'll probably be a little more collaborative moving forward than what it was under Al Golden. And the other thing I point out is when I wrote that story last month about how many former head coaches were involved in the semifinals of the playoffs, a number of the guys that I spoke to talked about how much better they were as coaches now after they had been a head coach. Largely all of them had been not an overly successful head coach, but they believed that process had made them a better coach today. I'll be curious to ask Chris Ash about that, and specifically where he believes he's improved the most from his time as a head coach to where he is as a coach today.
There could still be some coaching movement among Notre Dame's assistant coaching staff, but it doesn't look like it now. And I bring that up because one And of course, you have to replace Chad Bowden and Zaire Turner, and Notre Dame is in the process of working on that with James Blanchard and some others. But one coach lost out of 10 assistant coaches, a really good one, a really important one in Al Golden, but that's pretty good, especially when you look at who Notre Dame or his last opponent lost their offensive coordinator Chip Kelly to the NFL, Jim Knowles to a Big Ten rival in Penn State. Justin Fry, their offensive line coach, went to the NFL. So, I mean, all things considered, losing one coach and that could still be fluid, but it doesn't look like it is now. So that's a pretty good deal if when you consider that. Look, success leads to losing coaches, and Notre Dame had an inordinate amount of success, and they only lost one, albeit a really good one in L. Golden. JB, what latest on James Blanchard? It's looking more and more like that's about to happen for Notre Dame.
Yeah, allegedly there should be complete and final resolution today. I'm a little surprised that things have dragged on the way that they have. I know Texas Tech is doing everything it possibly can to try and retain Blanchard, but I think it's noteworthy that Blanchard spent Saturday night in South Bend and was in the Goog yesterday meeting folks. So I think that tells you that this is a pretty advanced situation.
I'd be interested if looking back to see what some. I think we've done this every year, Tim, that we think it's all done for the coaches, and it's early February, and all of a sudden the NFL finishes up. And Laurinaitis had to leave after this, right? This is off the very top of my head. Last year, Laurinaitis didn't leave too early, but as you point out, Ohio State, the national champion, lost both coordinators, and I bet you they'll be okay. They'll probably find a way to bounce back from that. But Al Golden, once you realize you're losing Al Golden, that the chances of upgrading on paper over Al Golden were negligible. So then you just see if you upgrade in reality. We won't know that for 3 years. Al Golden was way better in his third year. He was really good in his first year at Notre Dame, but he was way better when you look back at those numbers. And they obviously the whole program was way better. I shouldn't put that all on Al Golden, but you were never going to upgrade over Al Golden on paper unless you brought in the best, unless you went to the Kansas City Chiefs for your defensive coordinator, and that probably wasn't going to happen.
No, it's funny looking back. This is the 2-year anniversary of me staking out Tommy Reese at the South Bend Airport.
Yeah, so guys are still leaving.
stuff still happens in early February sometimes, so I guess you can't rule anything out. I guess I sort of view as like they upgrade, downgrade. Like Al Golden was probably as good as it gets. I mean, that's why you're a Broyles Award finalist. But they don't need to have the best defensive coordinator in the country to, compete for a national championship. So it's like you need Ash to fit in. For Golden, I think they needed him maybe more to stand out, if that makes sense. But they've got a good staff in place. They've got good culture in place, as Bryce mentioned. So I think for Ash, it's much more of like, how do you be a good teammate on a staff more than how do you lead it? Whereas I think, when they hired Mike Denbrock to replace Jared Parker, it was like they needed a leader in that room, and then less of a collaborator. Maybe the opposite's true on defense right now.
Well, now you're talking about culture, Pete, when you start mentioning those kind of things.
Yes. Yeah. I
Fitting
think
in.
if this was a drinking, it's a little early for a culture drinking game, but
Yeah, I'm done talking about that. But I do want to say that the challenge for Chris Ash is that he's got a lot of leadership to replace, and it's straight up the middle of the defense. Xavier Watts at safety, Jack Kaiser at linebacker, and then Mills and Cross at defensive tackle. That was essentially the leadership of your defense and a whole bunch of talent too. And so a new dynamic needs to be created there. Spring drills, I expect that to be, we hinted last week that we knew what that was. We couldn't say it. I expect that to be announced this week in fairly short order. And then we talked about Blanchard. Tyler Merrill, Notre Dame got a verbal commitment from Tyler Merrill, the 2026 interior offensive lineman that plays tackle in high school, or at least I saw him playing tackle. Have you guys seen this guy? He really is I'm not saying he's this good, but I'm saying when I watch him play in terms of motor and the way he approaches things and then body type, he attacks the game. I'm really hesitant to say it.
with a culture.
No. He attacks the game like Quentin Nelson attacked the game. I'm not saying that he's that good, but a guy that plays tackle that's really, really big, aggressive, mean, nasty, consistent interior offensive linemen that'll be part of Notre Dame's class of 2026.
Usually the needle moves for me when I guarantee someone's going to be a tackle that's brought into Notre Dame. But looking ahead, I think in 2027, you would still have Knapp and Lambert and Will Black. So I don't have to have the needle move for tackles all the time. But
Yeah, no,
tackles
Merrill's
can
not a
go to guard,
tackle.
and guards can't go to tackle. Is my point. Tackles can go to guards can't go to tackle. I also like it when they have the obvious centers of the future, which is why you and I think, were so high on Heron. Well, that's why I was so high on Heron. I
No,
think you like this film.
I
I
just
just like
like
it
this
when it's
film. Yeah,
yeah, when it's obvious that what the role is for them. It was like for Mustafa when he came in, he was going to be the center of the future,
yeah,
and I
yeah.
like that.
No, I think that's important. It's important to map that, especially center if you haven't played it in high school.
Yes.
You got to map that out and spend a whole bunch of time doing that. I did want to talk about it is now official. The schedule for 2025 on paper, as we sit here now on February 3rd, it looks a lot more challenging on paper than the past one, especially the first 7 games. I think we talked about this recently. Of the first 7 games, however, 5 are at home, and so that is beneficial. And then
Yeah.
there are 5 games in November, and 3 of those are on the road. Um, but in those first 7 games, it's at Miami, Texas A&M, Purdue, at Arkansas, Boise State at home, NC State at home, USC at home. It's nice to have those 3 games in Notre Dame Stadium, but that finishes off a 7-game stretch before a bye week. That looks pretty challenging. NC State was down last year, but Dave Doran's used to winning 8, 9 games a season. Who knows where USC will be, but we always know that they're going to walk in here with a decent amount of talent. And Boise's going to have to make a bit of a transition as well. At Arkansas is interesting. Notre Dame's never played there. They were a 500 or thereabouts team again after going 4-8 the year before. Still think that's a challenging trip in the middle of Arkansas, in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas.
It's funny. We preseason we're always talking about maybe the schedule will be harder than you think it will be. Last year's schedule was not. It worked out exactly as we said. Notre Dame was a double-digit favorite in most games last season. You can turn it around any way you want, but Notre Dame's the closest point spread after A&M was 6.5 for Louisville, and the other one was just a wrong point spread, 7 for Purdue. Like everything else, this schedule played out the way everybody said it's going to be weak. 22.5, 27, 28. They lost 14, 14, 26, 20.5, 15, and then USC are the points. Those point spreads aren't coming back this year.
No, they're not. JB, you been to Fayetteville?
I have been to Fayetteville, tucked up way in the northwest corner of the state. Not by any means the easiest place to get to. Maybe we'll be fortunate enough to somehow find flights from South Bend to XNA. I think that's the airport code for the airport there in Fayetteville. Otherwise, we'll be flying into Little Rock, which is a beautiful little town with the Clinton Presidential Library right downtown. If you're a history nerd like me, it's not a bad spot, and some great dining in both places. So it's a unique college town for sure. They will be rabid to host Notre Dame because I know a number of their staff and fans, and they were dejected not to get to play at Notre Dame. So that will not be an easy task. It's a make or break year for Sam Pittman. He did just enough this year to save his job with the Hogs, and I don't know that Arkansas had, I think, 16 or 18 million dollars on hand to take care of buying him out, especially with the infusion that they had just placed into the basketball program to go land John Calipari. So interesting time. I can't remember if they'll have Taylor Green back at quarterback or if he was one and done after transferring in from Boise State.
Can't we fly into Tulsa?
Maybe Tulsa.
Isn't
Maybe
that
Tulsa's
closer?
not bad. Yeah.
I land at Little Rock at 11:58 a.m.
Whoa, you already had that booked?
So my friends, I feel anybody going to Fayetteville, I apologize for all my friends who on Labor Day weekend got a hold of the Hyatt and found out they had not jacked up their prices yet. So 16 rooms were booked that night.
I was just say I like schedules where there's like
somebody got in trouble at the Hyatt.
Yeah, somebody lost their job. I was to say I like schedules where you could have a reasonable debate about like what the trap game is.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like this schedule has a bunch of Georgia Techs of 2024 on it.
As opposed to one.
Yeah, opposed to one Georgia Tech without Haynes King. So I think it's a tricky schedule. There's a lot of games that you should win 4 out of every 5 times you play it. But if you play 10 of those games,
Right.
the math
Right. If you don't
works
play,
in a
yeah,
certain
if
way.
you don't play well against NC State at home, you can be in jeopardy. If you don't play well at Arkansas, you could be in jeopardy. Now the back half in November, I guess the back 5, November 1st at BC, Navy at home, at Pittsburgh on November 15th, Syracuse at home, and at Stanford, which the Rose Bowl excursion was scrapped by Stanford. Um, Either way, always good to end the season to fly out to the state of California.
You have definitely hit on that back half, though, Tim. If you lose that and you're Notre Dame and you're good, it's your fault.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of the way I look at that
Yeah.
scheduled back half.
Yeah, Stanford nixing that from what I was told. Rose Bowl officials were on board to have the game there. Notre Dame was on board to have the game there. Completely understandable. If Stanford doesn't fight to keep that game at home, it would have only had 5 home games. It's going into the 3rd year there for Troy and Troy Taylor. So makes sense why they took a stand to keep it at home. Stinks for those of us who didn't have a particularly vested interest and just wanted an excuse to cover a game or another game at the Rose Bowl.
Guys, I did want, before we wrap up segment 1, I did want to mention that Jack Kaiser's participation in the Senior Bowl. A lot of platitudes thrown his way for his performance this week. Not surprised that Jack Kaiser would take advantage of the opportunity. I know that Riley Leonard started out hitting his first 3 passes. I'm not sure what he did after that, but he certainly showed himself well during the week. But that's what Riley Leonard does. He goes places and he impresses people. And of course, accuracy is going to be a huge factor in his ability to land on a roster. So will he be day 3 pick? Will he be a free agent? He will be in somebody's camp. Good athlete, good attitude. If he can improve his accuracy, he's got a chance to play a little bit more football than what he's played so far up to this time in his career.
I think he went 6 for 7. Sorry.
Okay. No. Looking to upgrade your wardrobe, founded by Notre Dame alum Go Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season. Check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. We'll be back in a minute with segment 2, Burning Up the Boards.
Welcome back to segment 2, Burning Up the Boards. Our first question to Martin Evenflow. There are always adjustment periods for new coordinators, but considering returning talent, what is the minimum level of success we should expect from a Chris Ash defense in year 1?
Well, again, this is sort of trampling all over much of our discussion from the opening segment. But the culture is set. You have a defensive-minded head coach. I don't think we're looking at dramatic wholesale changes from scheme or philosophical standpoint. What you're looking at is the need to fill the void of particularly 4 guys in Mills, Cross, Kaiser, and Watts who played like a combined 1 million games. So I think it's very significant from an experience standpoint of what Notre Dame has to try to replace. But I love the second level talent that Notre Dame brings back. I think I'm pretty clearly bullish on that. I love the secondary, especially when you're poised to add in the new Devontae Smith from Alabama to fit back there. I think I've already told you I'll always defer to coaches, and coaches told me that when they watch tape of Notre Dame, 8 was a problem. 8 is a Don Schuler. So Christian Gray, I think, will be better. He'll bounce back. He'll get some stuff ironed out, and he'll probably get out of a little bit of a mental slump that he closed the season with. And Leonard Moore looks like he's just teaming to be that next superstar. If Ben Morrison had stayed healthy and you feel strong about Christian Gray and where you were going with Leonard Moore and some other young guys, you were getting really close to being able to proclaim Notre Dame as DBU, especially when you factor in Kyle Hamilton being drafted in 22 and X Watts getting ready to be drafted along with Ben Morrison in this class. So there will be some growing pains. They've got to shore up the front and they've got to get those guys back healthy, especially Boubacar Traore and Botello. I expect Bryce Young to be a superstar sooner rather than later. We've already seen flashes of his immense talent. So success. I don't expect Notre Dame to lose a game next year because its defense is riddled with breakdowns and gives up 45 points. There will be breakdowns, there will be growing pains, but I don't think it's going to be a sieve. I mean, folks, I covered the Sal Sunseri Tennessee defense in 2012 that set all the wrong records. It might still be in the record books for the most points allowed in the season, and they only played 12 damn games that year. So I call I call it the salmonella defense because it was bacterial infection.
Well, I think for starters, although I guess Al Golden's defense gave up 21 points a game in his first year. But I mean, for starters, I think that Notre Dame defense should not be giving up 20 points a game over the course of a season. And so that would be a barometer for me. Talking about defensive ends, and I think we mentioned this last week. If you get Traore and Botello back healthy, and Botello seemed to think that he would be fine. Traore seemed to think that he would be fine as well. So if you get those guys playing their best football at some point fairly early in the season, you've got, I mean, look at your defensive ends. You have Traore, you have Botello, you have Bryce Young, you have Tui Alamaka, you have Burnham, you have Logan Thomas, who they like. So, I mean, that's a bunch of talent that has all flashed, and Christopher Burgess is coming in. I don't think they're going to need him as a freshman. He's probably going to need some development, but that's a pretty darn good group of 5 or 6 guys at defensive end that can make some noise for them from the outset of the season.
I think you're probably going from a top 5-ish defense to a top 15-ish defense. I guess that's, if you want to
Take
get
that.
statty, or, the last 29 games, how many times did Notre Dame play winning defense? Probably 25 times. Louisville, USC, Ohio State, Clemson, and like you could have a debate about Louisville and Clemson, I guess. But maybe that happens one more time. Where you're sitting there and you're like you had to win 33-28, or 35-31. But that's my expectation. How good Notre Dame's defense is next year, I think, has a lot more to do with the defensive tackles than it does with the defense coordinator.
Thank
Yes, I think the defensive tackles are the main thing. And as long as the change isn't absolutely wild, because remember, we say it's a big deal that they started as a 500 unit in the spring last year, 500 level class. Well, they can't do that when you have a new defensive coordinator. So as long as he's able to simplify what he wants early on, and I think maybe take the advice of Al Golden, who decided I don't need to install everything I humanly possibly know about defense either. I still feel like that is advice every coordinator coming to college should take. Is doesn't matter how much you know, it matters how much they need to know and how much they can learn.
And you just like, I want to throw the warning out to everybody that there is a transition. There's a transition in coaching style. There's a transition in terminology. There's a transition in just some of the nuances that Al Golden didn't even have to say out loud by year 3. And so I know nobody's going to have patience, but you have to have a little bit of patience to understand that any type of transition has its challenges, and this one will as well. We have a question from AC_Irish. Nebraska canceled their spring game, apparently in part due to other teams, quote, scouting their players during the game. Could this become a trend that the Irish follow, or is the Blue Gold game too important as a tradition?
Eventually, someone pulls the trigger and decides not to play a full-scale spring game because every coach that has come through, the last 3 coaches at least, wanted it to not do it. There's my point. I don't think I made this on the boards. I talked about this on the boards for a while. I don't care what they do, but coaches do. If you're going to play Jack Kaiser 5 plays, There's no point in playing Jack Kaiser any of those plays, which is what they did last year. In the past, it was, okay, here's our starters, Howard Cross and Jack Kaiser, you earned it. If you're going to play at all, you're risking injury in the blue gold game. And people say, why is that different than practice? Because they go a full practice. If you see a full practice, a real full practice, you're not holding Jack Kaiser back all the time because you're afraid of injury. So I think injuries will make it happen. I think if Marcus Freeman won the national title this year and Notre Dame had a truncated offseason, he could have said, we can't play a full spring game. We'll revisit it in the future, and it would be gone forever. But now you're the guy that canceled the spring game, and you didn't win a national title. So it's a lot harder on you.
It's, as we talked last week, though, I expect it to be highly modified regardless, whether it's officially modified this year or moving forward. I told you I've seen spring games with skills competitions and one-on-one battles and things like that, far more resembling a summer prospect camp than a spring game as we all know it. I do think that Notre Dame believes in the value of the spring game as an opportunity to get much of the community into Notre Dame Stadium and see a quote unquote football game that maybe they otherwise would not get to see. I know Marcus Freeman personally has been very involved with getting some of the underprivileged youth inside Notre Dame Stadium each of the past 2 years. Really pretty fascinating how he took the initiative on that and worked with St. Adalbert's and some other local schools and community leaders to have a bunch of kids here in 23, even though it was freezing and miserable, and then brought a bunch back in 24 and even expanded it some. So there are community things that I think it's more than just Notre Dame saying, oh, the blue and game is important to us because it's tradition. I do think that Notre Dame believes in the community power of the blue and gold game.
I think from a scouting standpoint, Matt Rule is kind of missing the boat. Like
Yes,
I think he's over
the
the top
idea
on
that
that.
like,
I mean,
oh well, I saw Jabron Payne run past Preston Zinter, and now I'm going to make Jabron Payne this huge NIL offer. Like, I don't buy that for a second. That these coaches need to watch a spring game that everyone says is worthless anyway to make a talent evaluation. But if you want to change the spring game into like more of a football festival and have it be more of a community outreach, I think that's totally fine too.
I think that's a good phrase, Pete, football festival. And look, nobody has said they're going to do this, but I do think that especially when you start playing 16 game seasons that
yeah.
spring
Well, that's
spring,
why.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, spring football has to become more teaching and less hitting. I mean, you can get a whole bunch done, and you have to do, there's got to be some contact, especially for the guys that are trying to earn a spot in the rotation. But I think we're going to see I don't know how dramatic of a change, and I don't think Notre Dame I don't think they're going to cancel that day, that blue gold game day. But
Oh, I don't think they would
no,
ever do
but
something like that.
right, and they shouldn't.
Yeah.
But the process needs to be changed. You can't have Logan Diggs and Jabron Payne and who else got hurt? Oh, Diggs was his shoulder. You just can't have
It
those
happened
kind
there
of
though.
things.
I mean, it happened in the blue gold game. It
Right.
happens.
And Tim, your point about it's not a regular practice. A regular practice, there's a limited number of live snaps.
True. That's
In
true
a
too.
blue
Yeah.
gold game, it's all live snaps. And so if you were to make it some form of a regular practice and a semi scrimmage, you're just reducing the percentage of chance of having a major injury in a live snap. And so they need to do something like that. Football festival, Pete, I think is a good phrase. There are people that get paid to be very creative about all the things that happen on Notre Dame's campus.
Well, I think they should pay Pete Sampson for the football
They-
festival that's coming
I
up in
think-
2026 because
Well, he's got the name anyway.
Trademarked.
Right?
Trademark.
Yeah, he's got the
You
trademark.
should register domain name NotreDameFootballFestival.com right now, Pete. Don't wait for the end of the pod. Get
Yeah.
that taken care of right now. I would note that pardon me, we've already seen that college basketball programs, college baseball, college softball programs, they're all allowed to scrimmage other opponents. We still can't quite get to that point in college football for some reason. And then it's already been indicated to me that, to your point about teaching TP, there will be more walkthroughs this spring
Right.
as part of the process than ever before under Marcus Freeman.
JB, that's a big Brian Kelly thing at Notre Dame. He really wanted to just scrimmage another team as opposed to his own team. And
Yeah,
he also
there's-
didn't he want to move it to July, like late July to start camp or something like that? Early August when they were hitting something along that. I always found
Tim,
that one weird, but I like the scrimmage idea.
Yeah, Tennessee and North Carolina tried to get that push through to happen, and they were going to scrimmage one another in football, and just I
Well,
don't pretend to understand all the reasons why the answer is no. I just know for now the answer is no.
you certainly open yourself up for a greater possibility of injury if you're scrimmaging an opponent, but trying to find a balance there. We got a question here from ND Fan 08. I don't think he's got all of his details quite correct, so we're going to throw this out there. With Isaac Rochelle officially retiring from the NFL, did Sampson win his bet versus O'Malley Priester? Question mark. I'm blanking on who the bet was actually between with Pete. This was O'Malley's prediction. Did you say 8 years in the league,
I
7 years
said
in the
10,
league?
but Pete conceded that 8 is enough. So I
I
called
think
him.
the spirit of the bet, O'Malley won, even though it was 8 years, not 10.
I said he was a 10-year veteran backup in the NFL when his career ended so it was before the 2017 draft, I guess,
Yeah.
right? Is that his career ended in 2016. So that was the point was you don't have to be flashy and have 45 pressures to be a very good professional football player on many teams, and it worked out. He was on many teams as well. By the way, good-natured Pete Sampson would often send me texts. Isaac Rochelle has been signed by the Cleveland Browns. Isaac Rochelle has been signed by the Las
Tweeted out
Vegas
by Isaac
Raiders.
Rochelle. I mean, it was very matter of fact.
Yes.
So
Uh,
I took some pleasure in Sunday morning sending O'Malley Isaac Rochelle's text that he's officially retiring from the NFL.
7 seasons in the NFL, technically. Uh, Seventh round draft pick, 2017 of the Chargers. Chargers, Colts, Browns, Raiders, 113 tackles, 9.5 sacks, and he had an interception along the way. Isaac Rochelle, one of the great, I mean, I think we can all, JB, you didn't get a chance to know Isaac Rochelle, but one of the great representatives of Notre
Yeah.
Dame football. I mean,
Good
just a
dude.
really, really impressive person who maximized his opportunity to play in the NFL. So
He was like Jack Kaiser with 3 fewer years of college football, or whatever it would have been, 6 fewer years
yeah,
of college football, however that
yeah.
worked out.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is a good chance for me to slip in. I wanted to say this in segment one. Most people know this, but Pat Coogan will be playing his football in Indiana this year. And Rocco Spindler is going to Nebraska. Those are good landing spots for them. I'm sure they're making more money than they could have as essentially backups at Notre Dame in 2025. So good for them.
Our next question is from Donnelly, 3434. Rank these interior defensive linemen from least to most snaps. Well, let's go most to least because that's a weird thing I just read. Most to least snaps, guys. Ready? Rubio, Hughes, Sevillano, Mookum, Heinisch, and Dawson. So you're looking at 2 guys that didn't play much, 2 transfers, and the reserves that had to hold the fort in the playoff.
Yeah, Hughes being Elijah Hughes, the red shirts. No, he did play. He will be a junior eligibility wise this fall. I I think most snaps. I think there's a really good chance. I would say Rubio because I think Heinisch is going to split with Dawson, although Dawson will get a ton of snaps. Um, so Rubio first, Dawson second, Heinisch third. I'm going to say Hughes fourth, Mookum fifth, and Sevillano sixth. How's that sound?
I will
I think
switch
it's
Sevillano and Mookum.
Yeah, I think I
You
would
would
agree with
switch
that
them? Okay.
too.
So
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier in the show. It's just like what they get out of defensive tackle is such a make or break for next season. And I guess we'll see what happens with Jason Onye, whether he fits into this mix or not. But it is a lot. Even though Mills missed time at the end and Cross missed time in the middle, it's just a lot of snaps, man. They got to
It
replace
really
a
is.
lot of snaps at those positions. And so if it's like another way to look at it would be like, is Rubio going to give you 600 snaps? Is Dawson going to give you 540? Because that was essentially what your number one and number two did last year, even though they missed, 3 games each. It's a lot of work that is going to have to be replaced, which is why if you can get Jason Onye back, would be really really significant.
Yeah, there's going to be X number of snaps that have to be played by defensive tackles next year or interior linemen, Pete, to your great point there, and the more bodies you can distribute that across, the better off you have for mitigating injury and for staying fresher for potentially a return trip to the CFP. So I would expect Gabriel Rubio to lead that group in snaps, but I think you don't want him leading the group with 600 snaps and the next guy behind him at 400 or whatever.
Yeah, and that's a big jump for him too, because guys like Mills and Cross have done it before, but they built up to that. So 600 would be a lot. I was on a thread about this. I think one of Blanchard's main things is he's going to look at that roster. I think they need Chris Smith to come in the portal in the spring. Chris Smith plus to add to the defensive line competition because Mukum and Savillano are still just theoretical right here when we're saying how much they can play. It's a fact until they play a little bit of college football. If they were ready to play, they would have gotten in somewhere in the USC Indiana playoff series.
Yeah, Tim, if you get Onye back, that is the equivalent of
Onye would be huge
a transfer. Yeah, and I mean, I think he's an important addition to that mix. The other part of the question here from Donnelly3434 was, if I told you one of these six will become a star player, who would you assume it would be?
Maybe Dawson. I don't know.
Yeah, that's mine because
he's flashed. He's definitely flashed. He's got like 10 career sacks right around it. He's forced a couple of fumbles over the course of his career. Pretty good frame. Played a lot of football. So that would, Dawson or Rubio. Look, I was so impressed with Rubio in the postseason and the way that he battled at the point of attack. And he was one of the few guys, I made this point already, that I thought could stand up the Ohio State offensive lineman in that title game and have a chance to hold ground and try to get off block or at least hold up his blocker and let one of his teammates make the tackle. And as we sit here and talk about Onye, it's fair to point out this time a year ago, there was no Gabriel Rubio in the program, and he had to scratch and claw and earn his way back, and then only to immediately be injured within the first day, I guess, of preseason camp. And then look how valuable he was by the end of the season. So Marcus Freeman has proved there is a roadmap. Now, can Jason Onye follow that roadmap?
Dawson would be my pick because I think, as you said, John, I mean, from what I've seen on film, I'm seeing him flash. I think he's quick enough. You can two gap with him a little bit if you want. I think he's got a chance to be really, really good. If it's not him, it's Rubio, and I wouldn't say any one of those other ones are really in a position to be a star. But Tim, it probably wouldn't hurt to have Onye back and another interior defensive lineman coming out of the spring. I agree. James Blanchard and the crew should be looking for something like that. It's just I'm not sure they're going to play 16 games next year again, but you have to
certainly
prepare.
You hope there's 14 though,
you
right?
Hope there's at least 14. Yeah. And so you have to prepare for that. The whole concept of 16 games. I mean, Notre Dame had never played more than 13. I need a break so badly by the end of 16. And my snap count was fairly limited compared to those guys.
Travel was harder though. If you want to look at
Travel was tough. Question from Mav29. With Ash and Mickens both coaching the back end, any thoughts on the split of duties?
I'll be interested to see where they do with Biaggi, more than anything.
I would think he goes to the offense to help at wide receiver. That is my thought process for Biaggi growing as a coach, and staying more involved with special teams than anything else, quite obviously, because it's working very well. I think that could be a spot to go help. I don't know why you'd stay in the defensive backfield if you're Marty Biaggi.
No, that wouldn't make sense.
But, yeah.
He could potentially also maybe work with the tight ends since that's Denbrock's group already. Right. And so
that's a good idea.
Denbrock and allow him to have a little bit more of that CEO role for the offense that we know Golden had the past couple of years on the defensive side of the ball. And look, there's going to be some new senior analysts that have to be hired because they lost Mike Moon to the Bengals. He had been a huge asset. He had been on staff as long as Marcus Freeman. He'd been here since 21. And he coached D-line for 2 years and linebackers for 2 years. And when you talk to people around the program, they love that dude. Similar for Michael Bearden. He lasted the transition from Chancey Stuckey to Mike Brown, and now he's headed to the NFL to rejoin Tommy Rees as, I think, assistant wide receivers coach for the Cleveland Browns. And I would expect one or two more analysts also to not return to the Notre Dame staff. So there will be some additional pieces. I'm sure Chris Ash will have some say and some guys he wants to bring in into those supplemental roles. And it's also important to note that now officially they can title them any damn thing they want to because there's no more restrictions on who can coach on the field. So they can go the NFL model and say, I'm hiring this guy as my new assistant linebackers coach, and he can be the assistant linebackers coach, and there's no need for a wink and a nod.
You better have a strong voice if you're the new assistant defensive back coach with Mike Mickens and Chris Ash as your defensive backfield head coaches the entire time, because I'm not sure you just walk into that room and say, I have an idea about what I want to change here in this coverage, because that's a tough spot.
I just want to point out that most of Ash's background is with safeties. Most of Mickens' background is with corners. So that balance, I mean, like, how are they going to split duties? We're going to have to talk to these guys to pick their brain a little bit and find out what their thought process is. But Ash was safeties. Mickens had always been corners. And so I think that's a pretty good balance starting on the back end of it.
Our next question from Golden Domer 25 wonders, grad transfers Sam Hartman, Drew Pine, and Jack Cohn want to enter this QB room. This is apparently hypothetical because I'm not prepared for this reality. Who are you allowing on the roster, knowing adding one means two leave? This is quite a question, Tim Priester.
It is quite a question, and my favorite quarterback of the three is Jack Cohn, so I'm taking Jack Cohn. If he had gotten a second year, imagine if he had gotten a second year at Notre Dame, which he should have.
He would have nowadays. He would have nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Nowadays, by the way, is 4 years later or 3 years later, but that seems crazy. I'd say
way back when.
I mean,
Cohn would definitely be mine.
You can have a discussion between Cohn and Hartman only. Cohn, I think, is really underrated as a Notre Dame quarterback. Hartman is overrated as a Notre Dame quarterback, but it's not like
he wasn't good, though, right?
Yeah, it's not like Hartman did nothing. He just was not a Heisman Trophy candidate the way he was portrayed at the end of September. So I guess I'd go with Cohn. Yeah, I'm going to go with Cohn. I could be convinced otherwise.
I mean, you eliminate the read option stuff, which would be a huge.
I mean, you eliminate with all three of these guys.
Yeah. Well, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's only a two-person question between Cohn and Hartman. And are you taking Cohn and the toughness and intangibles, or are you taking Hartman, who's probably the most talented of the three? It's really close, but Notre Dame doesn't have, in this scenario, I don't think Notre Dame's quarterback is going to be throwing to Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and all of that. So I want a little more grittiness and probably would make it a clean sweep of taking Jack Cohn. Well, what he did behind that offensive line.
I mean, he played.
It's pretty.
By the end of the year, he was one hell of a quarterback.
Yeah. And he was so gritty. I mean, he played with the toughness of an offensive lineman.
I think that he produced how many 100-yard receivers have there been under Marcus Freeman? 6 total? Jack Cohn's responsible for 2 of them in one game. The only game that he played when Marcus Freeman was the head coach. Yeah, it was Lorenzo Styles and Chris Tyree.
Yeah, that's nuts. Tyree could have had 1,000 yards if they made that stadium longer, because no one was catching him. That was a beautiful play. Cohn, with a good line protecting him,
right,
would have a heck of it. I mean, Sam Hartman had Blake Fisher and Joe Alt, and
there's no doubt you need well, the narrative on Jack Cohn changed from the beginning of the season to the end, but you need a good offensive line because
he can't move. He couldn't.
He was a statue back there. We said this, but for a former lacrosse player, it was weird. It was a little befuddling as to how immobile that he proved to be back there. But
he looked like he was in sand. I'll remove the rest of what I said about him looking like he was in sand that I told Pete once. But he looked like he was in sand.
Played with like the Toledo game that had dislocated finger or something.
On the winning drive, he ran down and popped back in. Maybe should have been close to Toledo, but I digress.
Underrated.
We have a question from Port ND. I realize this is a basketball question. I realize this is year two of a rebuild and growth is not going to be linear, but the ACC is brutal. And like a box of chocolates, we have no idea what Notre Dame is going to do from game to game, let alone half to half. The best thing to happen to Notre Dame hoops this year is Notre Dame football playing into January as nobody has paid attention. What the heck has gone wrong this season with ND hoops?
Boy, Port ND is absolutely right that the best thing that's happened to Micah Shrewsbury and company is the fact that football dominated, justifiably so, the conscience of everyone in the Notre Dame
Yeah.
ecosystem all the way through January 21st. They've been terrible in close games, is the only way to put it. I think I noted last week on the pod, what did I say? They've lost maybe 7 games by single digits or something. So now you're up to 8. I can't remember. I had a stat last week on the pod about how disappointed I was with their performance in single possession games, and maybe they were 3-5 going into last week, and now they're 3-6 in games decided by single digits. And so, to me, yeah, you had Burton hurt, and that was a dagger. But I think that there's been befuddling substitution patterns or lack thereof. You saw a really nice spark in the opening half last week from J.R. Knesny, 5 quick points, and gave them some offensive life when they didn't have a lot. And then you didn't see a whole lot more of him. I didn't notice a whole lot of him in the Miami game. They're not taking the next step that I think many of us here expected that they would take. And yeah, you can point to the Burton injury as maybe being the initial cause of that. But Burton was sublime last week, and there's just completely inexcusable loss to that Miami team.
So mad at myself that I watched that game Saturday night. Just irate.
I mitigated it and watched it from a casino. How's that?
Oh, okay, all right.
I,
That's
I,
okay.
I offset it, but I ended up coming back and looking at it a little bit more closely before I wrote an editorial yesterday. But look, hey, they went into that game having won 3 out of 4. They had a chance. All they had to do is a 7.5 point favorite over a Miami team that had not yet won under their interim coach. They had lost every game, all 10, since he had become interim coach, and they could have been 5-5 heading into the second half of the season. I'm not saying that if they're 5-5, they're going to make the NCAA tournament, because the league is so awful. The ACC is
Yeah,
worse than
they weren't going to make the NCAA tournament.
No, absolutely
Yeah.
not. I mean, they would have had to. Okay, if they had won Saturday, it would have been 5-5. They probably would have had to win 8 of their last 10,
Yeah, Tim,
at least.
they were the 68th team in when they were 15-5 under Mike Bray.
Right,
They were the
exactly.
68th team in. That's why he went pow when he found that out. That
Yeah.
is insane. 15 and
So
5
that
last
that
team in.
wasn't going to happen. But you would have,
Had
now
fun.
they're playing Florida State on Tuesday. You've been 5-5. Florida State struggling. I don't know what Notre Dame's going to do on the road against a team like that. But they are
I know
not
Tim
good,
Priester,
man.
when they're a 7.5 point favorite at Miami, you don't take.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And look, I don't understand the philosophy, the offensive and defensive philosophy, because they built a foundation last year defensively. Micah Shrewsbury looked at this team this year and said, we're going to be able to score a whole lot more. And they are averaging 10 more points per game than they did last year. But then that prompted their defense to slip. And so when we interviewed Shrewsbury last Thursday, we had to ask questions about refocusing on defense, and he talked about how they've made that adjustment. Apparently you can't do both. And I mean,
That's what
I
I
don't
always
know.
joked about with Bray the other way. What do you mean you can't play
I,
defense while you
I,
play offense?
I mean, I realize that maybe one will always be better than the other, but when you build a foundation, I thought they built a really nice foundation defensively last year. I don't think you can just push that aside because now you have Matt Alaco that's going to give you another outside shooter,
No,
or
probably not. That's
because
not a reason.
your paint presence with Kebajai, who just can't hold on to the basketball. You can't trust throwing the ball into him in the paint.
Plus, why would you? There's another option there. Priester, though, I don't want to put too much on this because it was a comment Shrewsbury made in July, but he mentioned we're not even practicing defense right now. That'll come. We're working on our offense.
Okay, right, exactly. Okay, so they're so adept offensively. You know how many assists they had when they lost at Syracuse?
I saw this on the board. It's amazing.
Three, three,
What?
three in a 40-minute game. So I'm confused. And look, this all starts with they don't have enough talent. And yet the
They have
game
more
of
than
bat
Miami.
Yeah, I was gonna
the
say they have
game
more than some of these
right.
teams
Oh,
do.
of course. The game of basketball, I mean, we've all been involved in it to some degree, and you can compensate for a lack of talent up to a point by doing the fundamental things right, and they don't do the fundamental things right.
That's the biggest surprise to me. I am shocked because I think Shrewsbury's a great basketball mind, and it looked like he was a great basketball coach last year, dragging that team through the season. I am shocked they are not fundamentally strong all around. I just, I'm absolutely, that's the biggest surprise. You can say they're not talented enough, but when you say 3 assists, you change everything there, and then you lose your, I mean, when you lose your defensive acumen, the way he was amazing as a defensive coach last year. I don't get it. If you'd have told me their record, I'd been like, oh, that's too bad. Someone got hurt and they're losing close games. I just didn't think they would lose close games like this, where the way they look is, I guess, the way of looking at it.
Yeah, 8 of their 11 losses by single digits. I just thought they would be better, and you've got a couple in there that are 1 point losses, or Miami was the ultimate come from ahead loss. So
The back-to-back 1 point losses to North Carolina at home and NC State on the road were crushing. And I realize that we don't mention this often enough, but the Notre Dame women are ranked third in the country, and Nia Ivy's doing a hell of a job with Hannah Doggo back from an injury. Olivia Miles is playing very well. Citron's a weapon for them. That's a really fun basketball team to watch. And but look, their talent level compared to who they're competing against is way higher than what the men are dealing with. But the inability to be fundamentally sound on both ends of the court is the most frustrating thing, because that's something I think that can be achieved on the basketball court.
Final question, Jim Booney, CRS. Last year prior to camp, Rod Hurd was committed to Notre Dame as a transfer and the assumed starter to Watts. Spring and fall camp unfolded and Schuler won the job. Do you think Jalen Stroman of Virginia Tech should be the assumed starter alongside Schuler next season? Who's likely to challenge for the position?
I think it will be Jalen Stroman, and I'm saying that based upon what the film that I've seen, mainly from 2 years ago, because he was injured in the first game against Vanderbilt this past year. I think it'll be Stroman. Who would it be if it's not him? I mean, I think Luke Telich would be in play. I think Kennedy Urlacher could be in play. I think Tay Johnson's an interesting athlete. Could Jadon Blair be a guy that steps up early as a freshman? I think all those guys could push for a contribution, but I think it's going to be Stroman based on what I've seen on film. But I thought it would be Hurd last year too.
yeah, I was going to say there, if not Stroman or yeah, Kennedy Urlacher. Coaches really liked him. He flashed over the course of 24. He did some nice things on special teams as well. We saw him in limited settings make some plays in spring and camp. So Luke Talich has quietly played a lot of football since coming to Notre Dame as a preferred walk-on, owning a schedule, and then earning a scholarship. And then Tabron Benny Powell is somebody that the coaching staff is really keen on. So probably Stroman, but I absolutely wouldn't discount Kennedy Urlacher or Luke Talich from making him absolutely positively earn it the way that Adon Schuler first did with Rod Hurd and then ended up beating out Rod Hurd.
I think a more interesting way to look at this question is like, who would be what is there a Rod Hurd Schuler dynamic among all the grad transfers coming in? Whether that's probably not Jared Dawson, a defensive tackle.
No.
Ty Washington at tight end, you would hope he'd be more complimentary. But like Will Pauling, very productive at Wisconsin, especially considering what Wisconsin has on offense. But, does Micah Gilbert make a big step? Is there somebody else? Does Faison keep him off the field because Faison is healthy all year? Devonta Smith, pretty much a bolted down nickel. Like I don't think Carson
Yeah.
Hobbs is going to beat him out, but I think you would think there probably would be some portal guy that comes in, and then a underclassman takes a huge jump. I'll be curious to see if we see that in spring, or we sort of see glimpses of that in spring.
It's worth pointing out that Hurd was not here last spring either to practice. I'm sure that did not. I think Adon Schiller would have won the job because he looks like a dynamite safety. But Hurd was just watching practice. I think he needed to be out there playing.
That's a good point, Tim.
Yep.
That's a good point. That's significant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hurd and Bo Collins.
Yeah,
So
and Hurd, I mean, Hurd proved invaluable to this football team in the role the Swiss Army knife, as Drew Mentok called him. I thought he did a great job as the season progressed. Pretty much was it starting with Louisville? I think that was.
I think Louisville's when he
Louisville was
really
made his
well.
first impact. Yeah,
Yep.
and he had a good playoff too. Who
Yeah,
would
he
start?
did.
I'm gonna guess that they split it, kind of like I don't want I don't want to evoke names that weren't as good in the past, but you know how DJ Brown and Ramon Henderson split some time there. I think Luke Talich and Stroman. Luke Talich was so good on special teams at the end of the year. I'd like to see if it could translate to 400 snaps at safety instead of 150.
They'll just rotate, is what you're saying.
They'll just
They're
rotate.
gonna-
It'll be easy. So
How do you replace Xavier Watts? You just rotate.
Just rotate. I think they rotate. I do think they rotate a little bit. The question for me is, can you move Tay Johnson to safety if one of your early enrollee freshmen doesn't hit right away? Because otherwise, you don't have enough corners.
Yeah, no, I think there's a good chance of that because you look at Cree Thomas and Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary.
I think someone will hit.
I think they like Zachary as a nickel, but I'm sure there's some flexibility once he comes in here. That will be interesting. Carson Hobbs, how much progress does he make? Yeah. So Stroman's really, really physical though, and I like that. But you also have to like a 6'4" guy at Telich at play at safety.
Yeah.
I think I think that kind of length makes a considerable difference on the back end of it. All right, we're going to wrap up with that. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider. We appreciate you joining us today. We'll be back on Thursday, February 6th. Until then, I'm Tim Priester with Tim O'Malley, John Bryce, Pete Sampson. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider.